Yeah, again, what's striking to me, just like when we were talking about the use of violence, Malcolm's comments on the media, and he talked a great deal about it in his speeches as well. They sound, if you take the race aspect out of it, eerily like the kinds of things you're hearing conservative Christians say about the mainstream media today, that they feel as though they've been turned into a symbol, or that their heroes, like Donald Trump, maybe have been turned into a symbol of something that he is not. And so it's interesting listening to Malcolm X, because it's reminding me that there's a broader principle at play here, which is that slander is dehumanizing. That slander takes away people's human dignity. It turns them into something, a narrative, a symbol, which they are not. But I'm just curious. I mean, how do you see this happening today? The media turning people or movements into symbols?
Yeah, I think the media is definitely complicit, but today I think that it's a little bit more complex because no longer are there sort of gatekeepers for public information.
Hmm.
Now you have Google, now you have social media, like in a sense, like we are the media, right? We're doing a podcast, right? In the
Yeah.
1960s, you have to have a radio show and some really expensive equipment in order to be
Hmm.
able to do a podcast. Two guys like you and I, unfunded, couldn't just go out and spend a few $100 and put out content.
Yeah.
So I think that it's a bit more complex, but the reality is that I think the people are buying into narratives.
Hmm.
They're buying into sort of the tribalism that is rampant today, and the slander and the gossip only fuel that. And are oftentimes catalysts for sort of these misrepresentations or these caricatures that we end up accepting as true. And then we perpetuate that with, again, slander and gossip,
Hmm.
and oftentimes people are doing it and they don't even realize that they're doing it
Um,
because they've taken this person. This person is in my tribe, so they're a trustworthy source. It's also more comfortable to just believe what they say. The other day I was thinking about the independence of our people, and how America are. We look at ourselves as people who pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and we make society happen, and we're very individualistic and we're very independent, and it's a very dangerous thing to encourage independent thinking in a society where you haven't taught people how to think.
hmm.
um, because you begin seeing people who are essentially confident fools, right? They've come to these conclusions, and so it's so interesting now, right, that the narrative of sort of the weak person in society, and even Christians perpetuate this narrative, is like, I'm not a sheep. I'm not a sheep, right? I'm not a sheep.
Don't want to be a sheeple.
And which is right, which is yeah, just fascinating because the Bible calls Christians sheep,
Uh-huh.
for one. But again, there's this idea that they're not being led; they're thinking for themselves. When the reality is that they're actually being led. They're just being led by the people that they want to be led by, and so there's this sort of self deception that takes place. And I think in America, we can definitely continue to talk about the media, but some type of responsibility has to be taken by the people
Hmm.
and by families, because you have to teach children, and you have to encourage adults, churches as well, how to think critically, right? How to
Hmm.
look at a situation and examine all of the facts, do your own research before coming to a conclusion that you publicly spread. Uh, Oftentimes, what happens is they watch a YouTube video here and then they accept it because it's a comfortable truth, and
Hmm.
then they retweet it and promote it as if it's true. And then at that point, once you've tied your name to it, oftentimes what happens is it's a lot harder to come back and say, "Hey, I was wrong," right? Because of the
Absolutely.
lack of humility that also exists in our society.
Uh-huh.
So I think the reason why we're seeing these things perpetuated, the slander and the misrepresentation and tribalism, um, the public has to be held accountable as well.
Yeah.
for what we're seeing.
Well, I mean, you made a great point at the top of this, which is we're all Walter Cronkite now. You know, we all have access to media. We all have platforms that we can speak from, whether they're large or they're small. And so now all of a sudden we're able to get information from all over the place. And it's not just from, you know, the accredited sources, which even as Malcolm X highlighted themselves, I mean, those white news media that tore down his image. But I think you are also making a fascinating point about how narratives, they allow us to bypass thinking, right? They just give us a neat way of saying, hey, this is how the truth works. This is what my group of people believe, so it must be the truth. I mean, I'll make it worse. If someone would just watch a YouTube video and then come to a thought, I'm gonna say, okay, that's great. The other day we wrote a blog and it was shared something like 400 times on Facebook and it elicited around 200 comments. But because we can see the analytics, we know that only 72 people actually looked at the blog. So all they saw was a headline. And so all of the hateful comments, all of the anger, or the people who said, this is awesome, you should do this, I know for a fact that the vast majority didn't even look at it. They just saw a headline and pressed share. And I think that's how we're thinking now. We're thinking in headlines, and we think we know what someone's going to say because I already have the narrative. I don't need any help understanding it. I just have to agree with you. Critical thinking is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
So
because and again, think about why those individuals did that so quickly. It's because they're prejudiced. They already had a preconceived notion or an opinion about what it was that you were saying or what they even thought you were saying, right? And they responded to it because they thought that the headline told them everything that they needed to know. And again, oftentimes this is the way that racial prejudice works, right? The skin color tells me all that I need to know, right? I don't need to ask any questions. I can judge based off of what I see, and it's fascinating because again, I gotta come full circle real quick and go Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is in the bar, right, and he's playing darts with Rebecca's ex-husband, and he goes on this narrative about the importance of being curious and not judgmental. Right. And I think today in our society, people aren't curious. They're just quick to judge. They don't ask questions. And I think that's very, very important to ask questions, to understand, rather than to be so quick to come to a conclusion about what it is you believe. Because you can engage something, you can watch a YouTube video and say, hey, this is interesting. I'm processing this. Would you guys like to process this with me? Right. But to share it and say this is on point or this is true when you haven't done any research or haven't really thought about it or haven't sat with it, that's exactly what James is talking about when he's saying being quick to listen and slow to speak. You're doing the opposite of what James is encouraging us to do.